benefit of listening to and discussing research that begins the process of exploring what PIAAC can tell us about the skills of adults in the U.S. Yesterday and today we've really been energized by this new, very strong evidence base to think about how we can use this foundation and take the next steps to make a difference. It's the goal of this session to really begin to define what those important next steps need to be. We're going to begin with Dan McGrath, who's the chief of the international division at NCES that really oversees all the international assessments, not just PIAAC, but also PISA and TIMSS and lots more. Right, Dan? And then we're going to hear from Gail Spangenberg, the founder and head of CAAL and so many important literacy agencies before then, and from Heidi Pacuilla from OCTAE about policy and practice implications of what we've heard. And then we're all going to talk about it together so that we have a chance to all, ask questions, raise issues, talk about what we think are the important next steps for us to take. So with that, I'm going to ask Dan to come up and begin talking about next steps in research.
I was supposed to be presenting with Eugene Owen, who's the project lead for PIAAC at the Department of Education, and is really the father of PIAAC in the United States. But Eugene had an accident last week and is recovering and is joining us remotely. So he's listening in, and I'm guessing I'll get texts during the presentation, so you may hear from him. And I also wanted to really thank Gail and her team and Sondra and everybody who helped in putting together this conference, because it's really a great and important conference. Peggy yesterday talked about how important this kind of work was. Eugene describes it as making a living data set through the use. And so that means also thanks very, very much to the authors and to everybody who reviewed papers and made this possible, because I think this is a really important work. And the data really don't mean anything until somebody digs into them and uses them and informs policy and practice. But what I was going to talk about was the future. And so I wanted to first, developments in research tools. And so NCES has what's called a PIAAC Data Explorer, and this is the link you'll see there. And in the next several months, we plan to add some functionality to the Explorer. And that means regression analysis, which would allow people to look at correlations between independent variables and dependent variables in a kind of multivariate way, and an analysis of gaps between subgroups. This would allow you in the United States, anyways, to look at not just average scores of this subgroup compared with that subgroup, but actually the gap between them. It's a subtle difference, but it allows you to do statistical testing on the differences between groups. And this data tool before that did not allow you to do that. And finally, and this is the thing I'm most excited about and is sort of hard to explain, is you'll be able to select on proficiency groups in order to do kind of profiling of them. As it is now, what you can do is you can say, what percentage of men are low performing? What percentage of women are low performing? This will allow you to say, what percentage of low performing people are women and what percentage of low performing people are men? Okay? So I think really a neat flip, allowing you to kind of profile proficiency groups in a way that we haven't been able to do beforehand, at least in a kind of clickable online way. So we're really excited about this development. And I say this as something that you would use, but it's also something that we use in our office. And so if you find yourself wanting to know these kinds of questions or the answers to these sorts of questions, you can contact us and we can turn something around really quickly for you by using this tool ourselves. Or, of course, you can use the tool yourselves if you can. And then the other thing is Education Skills Online, and this is an online tool that allow individuals to walk up to a computer and obtain what's really on a test of their skills that's on the PIAAC scale. So we're really excited about this. We've been excited about this for a long time, and every time that we report it, we say it's coming out in a few months. And so I'm saying it's coming out in a few months. And so we'll be back again in a few months probably to report the same. Can we go to the next? And then I think this next slide is going to be about data collection efforts that we have planned.
Predicting.
That's what I'm doing, predicting now. Okay. So in 2013 and 14, we just returned from the field. We did additional sample to add to the sample that we drew in 11 and 12. And this additional sample has included oversamples of unemployed adults 16 to 65, young adults 16 to 34, and includes a sample of older adults 66 to 74. I think yesterday the question was, older means 15 years older than you are. So I'm 51, and these are the 66 to 74-year-olds, so we're getting older adults. And we're also doing prison sample. Those data should be available, or the results should be available at the end of 2015 or possibly into 2016. And then we're talking internally about an additional small sample that might happen in 2017. We don't know for sure that we'll do it or when. And here are a couple of questions we have for you. Would be better to focus on, say, an update to national results, sample in a way that would give us a comparison between 2017 and 2012 at the national level, or better to sample in a way that would supplement the earlier data and allow kind of deeper analysis geographically, going down below the state level to local levels, hopefully. And here are upcoming, I waited there for a second because I was surprised to see that it came up so fast. So the upcoming NCES and OCTAE reports will be reissuing the first look that had the 11 and 12 data updated with the newest data. We'll have results from the prison population, and we'll have a report on young adults. And these should come out either the end of 2015 or in 2016. The OECD also, of course, is really busy on reports, doing a lot of what they call thematic reports, and this is more in-depth studies of specific topics. And so on the plans right now are a trends study looking back to IELTS and all, and a system-level causes and consequences of field of study mismatch. What field of study mismatch means that you studied one thing in college and are doing another thing in the job. And managing information in technology-rich environment. This is more information on the problems, people have been calling it post-stray. This is a deeper look at post-stray. And the effects of vocational education on adult skills and wages, and a study of skills and wage inequality. And there will be more studies coming after these from the OECD. And then the other thing that we're talking about internationally is what to do in 2022. And so now is the time to seek people like me out with your suggestions for what we do in 2022. We'll be meeting next week as a board in Paris to discuss. And so these are things that are kind of floating around. One is a different conception of problem solving, one that doesn't require computer administration, perhaps, for instance. It's come up a couple of times during the day today about what to make of the post-stray results, because there were people who didn't take it because they weren't either able to do the computer, or they felt uncomfortable doing the computer. And that percentage of the population wasn't tiny. It was small but not tiny. And you didn't get information about their problem solving at all because they weren't assessed in any way. So there's talk of trying to do something to get more about that. I want to remind you that the assessment that we have on post-stray is handy for what it is. For the people that were assessed, we learned a lot about their information management and processing and how they are able to find and manage information manipulated online. And then there's talk of, and I don't think that this is serious talk, but talk of combining the literacy and numeracy domain. And this is talk that's really coming from the OECD, and I haven't heard it from countries. I see shaking heads on that one. An improved background questionnaire. Of course, everybody wants an improved background questionnaire, but what's the direction to go? Do we add topics? Do we do more scales? What we're hearing internationally from people who have been looking at the background questionnaire is that they're interested in more scale kind of questions. So this would mean maybe asking more questions about a specific topic in order to be able to develop scales, rather than asking just a couple of questions about a lot of topics. That people were finding it hard to use the background questionnaire data because it wasn't set up in a way that really facilitated secondary analysis. Not that we haven't seen some really great secondary analysis, but I'm guessing that everybody who was doing it had some frustrations in what they were doing. Certainly we heard in the last session, or I at least heard at my table, some interest in additional health or health literacy questions. I'll say that a lot of these things came up in the development of the first round, and for all of the items that made it onto the background question, there were a lot of other items that didn't make it through the field test or didn't make it through piloting, and that's because it's really hard to ask questions that are meaningful in an international context, that are comparable across contexts. So it's hard work. We're interested in what topics people are interested in and whether they're interested in kind of scales versus individual questions. And then there's a lot of talk about measurement of 21st century skills. And so whether we'll still be talking about 21st century skills in 2022 or not, I'm not sure. I think we probably will be. I think that people are interested in these kind of characteristics of people that are unobserved right now, in a way, at least on these large-scale assessments. And then the other thing that we're talking about, and this is really by we, I mean just really me, and that is rolling data collection. And this would be doing the data collection kind of more in a way that's like the census does, in which you're kind of always collecting data. You may not have results to share every year, but you would have kind of a rolling collection that would accumulate up into something you could report more often than once every 10 years. From a bureaucrat standpoint, it's handy because it means we don't have to, we can have a steady funding stream that we're spending in a steady way. And we think from an information standpoint that it's really helpful for people too, because it means information more often, and what we're hearing is that people are wanting that. And those are the last of my comments, and they're really, as you can see, a lot of them are questions, so I'd be interested in kind of what direction people give me to take back. Thanks.
I was a member of the National Definition Committee of the very first one of the surveys like this, going back to NCES. And so I know from having tracked this kind of activity for a long time that nothing like this conference happened after either the NCES or NAL. It's great what you've done, and not just this research conference, but your website, which I find is more fantastic every time I look at it, and I hope everybody will check it out. It's full of all sorts of useful resources. I think that the longer we can keep PIAAC findings and analysis alive, the better. It's one of the best tools we have to inform action and keep the pressure on. So I hope you'll have the funds to stay proactive, really. Now, if you held up a sign that told me my time was up, I would have one sentence message for you, maybe two, and it would be, here's my whole message. Let's get real. It's largely about funding. I'm not going to comment, well, let me keep going here. I was asked to think some big issue, about big issues, and I'm just going to make maybe half a dozen points on things I think we need to do, if you want to call them next step things, if we're going to extend and improve service substantially in this country, because in the end that's what it all comes down to. CAAL, my organization, that's the acronym for it, CAAL, we posted a long blog not long ago with pages, 30-some pages of recommendations from 30 national leaders around the U.S. On national and state policy and planning issues. And some of the people who contributed to that are here. They pretty much cover the waterfront, so I decided not to go there. You can get copies of the blog on the table or go to the website where it is, and I can give you the address for that. On the train down here, I mean, I prepared my remarks. I was told I had 10 minutes to fit into 10 minutes, and I timed them. And then, and talked fast. But on the train on the way down here, I remembered a couple of experiences I had on the Hill on the way to WIOA, and I decided that enough time has passed that I'm going to share them with you. When this conversation was still about WIA and reforming and improving that bill, we had in the House, the Democrats were in control of the House then, the best legislation for the kind of stuff we're talking about, that way better than WIOA. It was the version crafted by the Democrats, and we were doing everything we could, groups like mine and CLASP and so on, to advance it. And so I was regularly on the Hill pushing things, and one day I called from my office, the staff, and said, how's it going today? And she said, well, to be honest, we just all came out of a staff meeting, and adult education and WIA were elephants in the room. That's worth remembering. As a result of which, the Congress got taken over by the Republicans. We got a bill created by Virginia Fox, which nobody liked outside of, the House of Representatives. And we moved on until we got WIA, which is a good, solid bill. But we could have had better. So we'll come back to that just briefly at the end, why I'm telling you that. I went to a hearing, this is the second story, where the Subcommittee on Education and Workforce, which was chaired by Virginia Fox, and they were talking about WIA and some related matters and workforce education. And it was the person I'm talking about whose office told me elephant in the room was Representative George Miller, who's a good guy in other regards. So he was on the subcommittee, and he objected to something that Representative Fox said about the Republican version of the bill that was being discussed, and he was right on the points. But she was more right because she turned to him and said, you could have passed your bill if you'd done it when you were in control of this chair. Anyway, with the passage of WIOA, adult education, which is Title II of that bill, is now expected to devote a larger part of its mission to upgrading adult skills and moving adults toward work and college. We haven't talked much about college today. WIOA calls for 1/4 of the required state planning to be from adult education. And just in passing, I'd say I don't think adult education and people concerned with employment and Title I issues and so on really understand each other very well or talk together as much as they should. The best policy planning and program development and implementation of WIOA won't mean anything if we don't tackle the funding problem. It's our top priority. I'm on page 2. It's important to keep in mind that there's great skepticism around the country about whether the same thing will happen with PIAAC that happened with NALS or NAL. We just got to overcome the funding problem to prove them wrong, because that's a large part of the issue here. Here are the other big picture issues, though. PIAAC is primarily a story about adults, not kids. In the past, we've taken the attitude that if only we work on K-12, that'll take care of the adults. Well, it hasn't, and it won't. Our target clientele should be the many millions of out-of-school adults 16 and over who will make up our workforce for decades to come. An adult education program director from Pittsburgh sent me an email on this topic, and here's what she said. It's been one of my great frustrations that any talk about the need for adult and English language literacy always leads back to fixing K-12, which, even if it were possible, is irrelevant for the adults who need to build skills now. By the way, something someone said yesterday, I think the better characterization of our education system is to think of it as kind of a three-legged stool. K-12 adult education and higher education. Adult education cuts across both of those, and it goes in other directions too. The adult education system's not as clearly defined as the other two parts because of the variety of provider-type institutions involved in it, CBOs, employment programs, churches, libraries, there's a long list of them. It's the first line of service, adult education, for low-skilled adults. Next point, adult education needs a much stronger voice in the political arena. We got a pretty weak one now, and it needs to elevate its profile to sort of get that. And our dealings with Congress, with the Department of Ed and other federal agencies, with state legislators, people we elect to Congress are essential in all of this. And PIAAC data can keep helping us make the case as we do that. Adult education is a nonpartisan issue in this country, even if it doesn't have a powerful voice. But we have allies in Congress. We need to keep working with them, both parties. Jack Reed and Ruben Hinojosa are two champions of adult ed, and they'll keep on being that. They get it, and so do a few others in both parties, including Republicans. Lamar Alexander, who as Secretary of Education oversaw the implementation of the National Institute for Literacy when it was enacted, and David Perdue, recently elected from Georgia, who chaired the National Commission on Adult Literacy and cares a lot about the subject. There definitely could be allies. So to sum up that point, WIA gives us opportunity, but unfunded opportunity. And a weak adult education presence on the Hill won't get us much beyond where we are now. We'll just keep tinkering at the edges and doing research for its own sake. A note about our service level in this country, it's shameful. Despite decades of evidence, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface in meeting the skill upgrading needs of adults, and especially low-skilled adults. PIAAC data reveals that 35 to 45 million U.S. adults tested at the lowest end of the skills spectrum. We're reaching about 1.4 million people today through Department of Ed funded programs, and maybe 2 million if we add adult education programs from some of the other federal agencies. We may have been too ambitious, but the National Commission on Adult Literacy, when it put out its report in 2008, called for serving, before there even was PIAAC data, 20 million adults by 2020 at a funding level of about 20 billion. And a principal voice in establishing that construct was a governor of a nearby state. I want to say something about the issue of barriers. There's been a lot said about that today. And my particular concern is whether we really rise to the occasion to serve low-skilled adults. I know. I keep going here because I'm about halfway through. I'll read this fast rather than try to sort of sound alive, so okay. We all press for serving low-skilled adults, but creaming is easier, cheaper, and faster, and higher-skilled adults are more apt to show up at the door. So it's not just a matter of funding, of having the funds and the programs and opening the doors. I don't think we've thought as much as we should have about how to identify the full range of cultural barriers that impede the participation and learning of low-skilled adults. And I'm thinking particularly about things that are affective in nature. Here's one I came up on recently which sort of shocked me. I'd be surprised if somebody here knows about it. In doing some work for UNESCO's Lifelong Learning Institute, I became aware of a strong connection between prolonged abuse and lack of caring in childhood, and whether low-skilled adults with such backgrounds will seek or value and then succeed in further education services. It's a 3-year ethnographic study done of a very large cohort in Ireland, where this link was not only established but for the first time, as far as I know, but found to have all sorts of implications for designing programs, support services, and instruction. I could tell you more about it, but I'll pass over the rest of this just to say it wowed me, that particular finding. I don't know anyone who's ever thought about stuff like that. I'm not talking about family literacy and that kind of thing here, and parents and children working together. I'm talking about understanding motivational needs, really. The title of the book, Learning Care Lessons, Literacy, Love, Care, and Solidarity by Maggie Feely, F-E-E-L-E-Y, if you want to look it up. To shorten the point, partnerships and collaboration, a lot has been said about the importance of that, and they're vital for funding and all sorts of other reasons. We'll get better outcomes, for one thing, if we sort of do more of it. And I'm talking about politicians and business and mayors and governors, corporate and private philanthropy. A final point, funding is a matter of choice, even in this time of sequestration. One of the ground rules in Washington these days is no more money. Government officials, for obvious reasons, can't call for that, but we can. But our leaders still find ways to, quote, make choices, as in adult education provisions in the recent omnibus appropriations bill. They found a little more for adult ed, but it still leaves adult education $30 million short of where it was before sequestration. Congress makes choices all the time. This was pointed out to me by a top Labor Department official at the first PIAAC rollout event, actually. But we don't do very well in the competition for funds, and the PIAAC findings should scare us all into action. Those who control the purse strings will have to make trade-offs in deciding funding priorities on the Hill and elsewhere, and they make such trade-offs all the time, and we need to keep pressing them to do it. I could say more about this, but the only other point I have left is a recommendation to AIR about something I think will make its papers more effective for the future, and I'll just share my notes with them later.
Before I begin, let me just say I am not the senior ranking official from the Department of Ed here today. How I ended up ending the program is something to investigate. So,
Yes, you are our senior ranking, long-lasting partner.
So what I say is not really the final word from the department, but I'll make some comments, and I'll try and echo Johan's comments that opened our conference. I think it's been fabulous. Ellen's comments were so great this morning to help us wrap up from yesterday, so I don't need to cover all the ground that she did. And Linda, your comments were great, helping us wrap up from this morning's panel. I think it is worth leaving here thinking about what we don't know and what the PIAAC doesn't tell us. PIAAC is great. We're all in it. We're all researching it. but it doesn't tell us everything. It's a snapshot at a moment of time, and we are missing a lot, and that's been shared through the day and a half, and we need to think about how to get learner voices in here, how to understand what we're finding, how to validate what we're finding, how to understand how people are making decisions about what they do. And I'll also say something politically incorrect, which is, where are our scholars of color? We are talking about a diverse population in the low literacy group, and they're not here. So we need to make sure that we are getting more partners in research to come in and work with us on these issues and understand the cultural and linguistic factors and barriers that are creating the situation that we see today. It's not, I think it was shared well this morning and by Linda also, it's not about pouring more skills in each person's head. It's got to be about a collective impact. It's got to be about looking across the whole community and how skills fill in what we need to do with our lives, you know, how we raise our kids, how we make decisions about where we live, how we make a better community, and what is the role that skills play in that. And PIAAC doesn't tell us. So we know a lot, but we don't know it all, right? So that was page 1.
How many more pages?
Just a few. One thing that I'll focus on a little bit is digital literacy, because it's like, you know, I'm a cat and it's the can opener. You know, you tell me digital literacy and I come running from the basement to find out what's going on. I think this is really such a critical issue because that's where the information lives these days. And happy to hear people talking about all the videos on the internet, because YouTube has now surpassed Google as the search engine, right? So what does that tell us about, and that's probably not true for us, I'll just say, right? We're all printy people. That's why we're here. But we're talking about a lot of people who aren't printy people. And how do they get information? So we really need to get out there and do those usability studies and understand how people are getting their information and what they're making, how they're making sense of it. We need to look at non-formal avenues for helping people get more information, get the skills that they need, and to help them understand that skilling up is of value. People will do it if they see the value in it. There's some disconnect. We know that education matters because we're all educated, right? Where's the disconnect here? Why is the uptake rate so low? There's so much learning that could happen out there in the world. Why aren't we getting more learners involved, and why aren't they completing? What is it that we're not offering them? What is it that they're not seeing? Again, that's not something PIAAC can tell us. We have to go out there and talk to learners and people who are non-learners, which is kind of a shocking way of slapping us into hey, wake up. There are people who are not involved. I like someone was talking about smartphones and getting our learning onto the phones. The Pew studies are showing us that that's where it's at. That's where the uptake is in terms of technology. What kind of learning best fits on that modality? And stop thinking about we know best how to design a course and now put it onto a phone. You got to start with what people have and build back out. So what fits best in the modality that's already in their pocket? What is it that we can put on those things? And we're all smart enough, innovative enough, we can figure this out. We've got to focus on that. I talked to Don Liu this morning and really thinking again and more about the importance of getting universal access and universal hands-on devices. People have got to get their hands on a device. They've got to go through all the practice and all the trial and error that you and I went through with our first laptops and tablets, and they've got to spend that time just learning and growing and learning how to organize information. So how do we do that? There are some nice public-private partnerships that go along with this to help fill in here, but they're not enough either. There's some municipal efforts that are coming up on this issue. They're not enough either. But we've got to get out there in our communities and rally support for these kinds of grassroots efforts. I wanted to say, Linda said, doctors wouldn't sit through this conference. And there's been a lot made that there are no employers here, but employers wouldn't sit through this conference either. We need them, and that's clear. And the amount of money that employers are spending on training for their frontline workers is astronomical, and it far surpasses what we're spending in adult education. Now, what it's going to is something else. And there's a lot of compliance training that has to happen. You start at Taco Bell, and you have to do the food safety, and you have to do the fryer safety, and you have to do, there are a lot of things that you have to march yourself through. And 2 months later, when you quit and you go to work at Kentucky Fried Chicken, you have to do the very same trainings. So there's a lot of learning that's going on, but there's a lot of opportunities that we could infuse a little more content into those compliance and regulatory trainings. Johan mentioned that we were engaged in an effort called Upskill. Nothing is fun without a new name, right? So we're upskilling, and that's coming out of the Vice President's report. We have been talking to employers a lot, and a lot of them. They are very much in this conversation. Although I have to say, we're talking to the HR folks and the training folks. It's not always this, I'm sure it's like government, I'm sure it's like universities. You don't always know what's going on down the hall or in the other office, right? So the training folks are very interested in training. They're very interested in upskilling. They're very interested in why the uptake rate of their offered trainings is so low and their completion rate is so low. I'm interested in Scott's studies from Canada.
Aptly named Upskill.
Upskill, all right. It'll fit in so well. So they're interested too. I don't want to be naive. There are other issues that the administration has with frontline workers, and we need to raise the minimum wage and stuff like that. We've talked about interagency cooperation and around the issue of digital literacy and around the issues of workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. There's a lot of interagency collaboration going on. It's hard work. You know that from reaching out to partners in your communities. It's not easy work, and it's not the fastest way to get something done, but it will be long-lasting. All of this work to work together will be long-lasting. And having people who know the same data set in 15 different agencies is phenomenal. That's really great, and it will have a very long-lasting impact. You will see PIAAC worked into requests for proposals and decisions and new programs and projects, and it will long-lasting and wide-ranging. And I wanted to say something about the need for research. Dan talked about what's coming next with PIAAC, but I also want to say we need to grow our evidence base of what is effective interventions. PIAAC is the snapshot, right? It's not interventions. How are we going to change what's going on? How will we not be here in 10 years and have the same results? We need to grow the evidence base. We have a lot of things that we know work, and we need to make sure that those things that do work get pushed out to teachers so that more teachers can be doing them and more programs can set themselves up to do them. Johan mentioned he's very interested in the career pathways work, and we've put a lot of our effort and money, what little money we have, into career pathways. We've joined with Department of Labor, HHS, Department of Transportation to pool money to focus on career pathways. What are the interventions that work in career pathways? We've got to push those kinds of interventions out farther. And we need to upskill our own workforce so that they can implement those interventions. And I'll say 2 more things because I'm at 0. There are 2 research opportunities that are coming up. One is, Johan mentioned PLOS 1, the public library. We have a call out for use of PIAAC data and health status and well-being, looking very, very broadly. It's the longest title of a special collection that they would allow. And so we filled up every character. So if you're interested in that, we're very interested in getting some good papers in on that special collection. The other is, Meredith is here from IES, yay, and they're very interested in secondary data analysis, which is what you've all been doing, and also partnerships, so partnerships with states or local areas or regions or workforce investment boards, to dig down a little bit and understand a little bit more about what's going on the ground and with learners. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.